All right. Hello, everyone. I'm here with Jessica Alonso from Twitter. And we were originally going to talk about uh, this short exchange we had yesterday about uh, okayness and whether it's grounded in our and grounding okayness in ourselves versus grounding okayness in other people. But then I started a fight on Twitter yesterday. uh, and now I'm like, maybe we could talk about that. Uh, so there's lots of different things that we could talk about. Um, let's see, how do I want to start off? So like, let me maybe start off with a proposition, which is that that uh that I think that we have been like generally as a scene too conflict avoidant, and that was probably good and necessary uh back like when everyone was kind of more just like, oh, I'm just recovering from my trauma and I need to like learn how to regulate my nervous system and not just get triggered all the time. I'm like, yeah, it was probably good that we weren't constantly triggering each other. um but personally, I have been feeling more of a desire to hash out disagreements and uh like find out what disagreements are around, and like I'm actually pretty optimistic that we can like use some of the stuff that we have. Like at this point, there's stuff in the water about like emotional regulation and about like noticing when you're triggered and like, all this other stuff. And I'm like, maybe we could use that stuff to have better disagreements. So that's what I
Mm-hmm.
thought to start with.
Yeah. Um, okay. Yeah, there's a lot in the like conflict, disagreement
Mm,
umbrella. And I don't do quite as much like taking in teapot as like a scene and like thinking about it in the aggregate so much. Just it feels I'm there, but there is like dynamic. I see the dynamics you're pointing to basically.
mm,
And I do think that people in general around this part of Twitter or my part of Twitter are pretty conflict averse. And it makes sense if people's main experiences of conflict have been that they are deeply threatening to your safety,
mm,
right?
mm,
That especially if you're in a healing process like you were talking about, like safety is really fundamental to be able to even like talk to your feelings or like look inside yourself, and
mm,
having like safe connections that can help kind of hold you and make you feel okay to like find out what's real for you. um that's important, right? But I really deeply feel that not everybody is supposed to be that connection for everybody else.
mm, mm,
Right, like in an ecosystem there's like a balance of these things. Like there's a balance of like acceptance and love and light and like um containment and like, yeah, I guess acceptance or approval might be the thing. Kind of like full equanimity. And then there's like a role for conflict. Like there's
mm,
a like conflict plays a role. It's actually part of how we like bump up against something and feel our bounds, right?
mm,
It's like,
mm,
oh, I'm not that, right? I'm
mm,
this other
mm,
thing.
mm,
And there's a way, I like fired off a small tweet about this morning that I think you probably saw, that
mm,
there's a way that because bumping into someone and feeling like, oh, we're like alike in this way, that feels really nice. Like, oh, that helps me feel more okay about myself because I feel okay about them and they seem to feel okay. Okay, like we have this like ease of connection here. Like you need enough of that,
mm,
but that's one way of sensing yourself. And there's this other way of sensing yourself, which is that, oh, I'm not like this person. And actually I don't like that person actually. That's weird. Like, and there's this idea like, oh, if I don't like them, if I disagree with them, if I'm sharp or like cutting, that I'm like really causing like this ripple effect of harm. And I just don't think it's like necessarily that simple. Like, of course, people can be abusive, people can be like overly harsh, and people can do damage, but also like a community's capacity for conflict comes from their capacity for repair,
mm,
which
mm,
totally depends on what you were talking about like the capacity for emotion, like emotional regulation. Like, how do you stay together and not like come to agreement about what each of us are going to be? Like, we don't have to be the same, and we don't
Mhm.
have to agree about like what you're going to be and what I'm going to be, but how
Mhm.
do we stay in connection
Mhm.
while having like the negative feelings of difference or the positive feeling? Like, that's what conflict resolution to me like is fundamentally, once people have enough like safety and
Mhm.
groundedness.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. There's something, I have probably a bunch of different responses. I'm not sure how I'll be able to organize them. Yeah, I like this thing about like, oh, this is like, I'm like this. This is the kind of person that I am, and then I'm also not like this, and this is not the kind of person that I am. There is this kind of like, so this is a little indirect, but hopefully it will be
Mm-hmm.
in some way a response to all of this. Like I've I haven't like been super immersed in like a hippie kind of community, but I'm familiar with some of them. And like part of the deal here, like there's a failure mode that I'm at least peripherally aware of in these communities that has to do with like being like all being like love and light only, or like good
Mm-hmm.
vibes only kind of things. And like
Mm-hmm.
again, like for some people that might be a necessary phase of like finding safety, of like, oh man, there's so much acceptance and love here, this is so great. Like, yes, sure, I also have benefited from these things. And there's a shadow of that thing, there's a shadow of like hiding disagreement and like substantive disagreements. And when you're running a community, there are some disagreements that really matter, like disagreements about how to run the community, disagreements about who should be in the community and who should be out of the community. And if we were talking like not just an online community, but like a commune or something, then there's substantive disagreements about how to run the commune, like who should, how do
Mm-hmm.
we assign chores, how do we figure, whatever, all this stuff. Like when you're trying to live with people, real disagreements arise that have actual stakes. And uh and there's a kind of like sweet sappiness that a group can have that involves kind of like sweeping my stuff under the rug.
Mm-hmm.
uh and so I'm aware sort of peripherally in the background, like, ah, that's like one way that communities can fail. I would like to
Mm-hmm.
personally try to avoid it.
Let me say one thing.
Mhm.
The opposite also is a failure. It's like
Right.
the no love family. Like, we can't
Yeah.
be kind to each other. We can't show affection. Needing love is weak or
Mhm.
dumb or whatever,
Mhm.
right? Like, any of those is not a healthy system. Like, what makes me feel uneasy is things that try to um remove the organic quality of
Mhm.
humanness and human connection,
Mhm.
which includes connections like decaying or falling apart or rupturing. Like, that's
Mhm.
actually part of the health of a natural system, is
Mhm.
people like newness showing up, new connections showing up, new life entering the system, and like things that kind of like fall away, things that get sick and then like fall apart. Like, that's health in an ecosystem sense.
Mhm.
And um I think people really struggle with it because there are like deeply negative feelings associated with disconnection, right? Like, when a tie is severed, when somebody becomes like less part of the thing because it's not right for them
Mhm.
anymore. Like, we
Yeah.
miss them, we miss their presence, right? Like, we
Right.
liked
Yeah.
them being here, right? Like, oh no, right? Things are changing in a way I don't like, and that's, I smile when I say that because I have such like an affinity for um, feeling grief with people.
Mhm.
But to me, that's kind of what that is. It's like, yeah, things are changing. We're growing. This person grew and like grew in a direction that for them made them start having a lot of conflict here in a way that like started to stunt each other's growth rather than promote each other's growth. And so for them to continue growing, they kind of had to like venture off and like
Mhm.
and we are sad about that because of love. And so we wish them well, and I'm actually kind of pretty excited to see what comes of that for them.
Mhm.
But people don't have that much capacity for those feelings, right? Like, especially, and I think this is really commonly true amongst the people in this like scene, let's say, is a lot of people found each other like from a place of like deprivation of connection, right? Like there, a lot of people found a lot of belonging in Teapot, like especially
Mhm.
during the pandemic and stuff. I think I like
Mhm.
arrived late to it, but
Mhm.
um, for a lot of people, it was like their first feeling of like real belonging in a group, and then that um, starts to feel very precious,
Mhm.
right? And there's like different ways I talk about that, where it's like people will attribute a lot more to the scene or to the group and not be able to see how much it matters the way they were showing up in that scene.
Mhm.
Like what they like, the authenticity that they came with, like what parts of themselves they allowed to be seen there, and how much that matters in like whether you felt belonging or not. Because I think for a lot of us, our experiences of trying to belong in other places was like really characterized by like contorting and trying to like hide,
Mhm.
and like for good reason, like um, and so you come to this place and you like really get this like sense of belonging. You're showing more of yourself. You're finding more people who are like you. And that starts to feel really precious in this way, where change to that structure, to that group, can be really scary, right? Because it feels like, oh, like shit, what if this all falls apart and then I'm back where I was?
Mhm.
Like there's this fear of like backsliding, I think, and or of like finding yourself without like that belonging or that connection again.
Mhm.
But there's a way that I think that being able to be in belonging with people and have like the negative stuff come up, that's really freaking important
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
for the belonging to like feed you in a
Mhm.
way that can last and like go with you if if you like stop being here quite as much and start being somewhere else instead, or if you like fully go out on your own into like the wilderness or whatever, like you get to take something with you, with like the
Mhm.
acceptability of you even when you were mad, like even
Mhm.
when you were grouchy with someone, that like you were able to do that, and like you didn't have to like make sure everything was okay about it. Like there was an okayness to the group, you
Mhm.
know?
Mhm.
Sorry, that was a lot.
That was
So
great. No, thank you. I really appreciate that. Like the thing that comes up for me around this is this question of like, do people have experiences of seeing repair in any form? And like I mean, I was even tweeting about this recently of like reflecting on my own experiences around this. Like, I watched one of my one of my first experiences of conflict was watching my parents argue. That's probably true for most people. And like those arguments were terrible and they never felt resolved. Like they just got worse. And they just like, this is an oversimplification, but they kind of just like got
mhm,
worse until they divorced. And I'm like, that was not a very what's the word? That was like not a very like, that didn't give me very much hope about the conflict. I'm like,
mhm.
oh, conflict is unresolvable and people just get mad and they stay mad forever. Uh, and they sometimes pretend that they're not mad, but then they get mad again. So that was like really bad. And there's like, since then I have had, other experiences of conflict. Like I've been in like authentic relating type environments where I've actually seen people sort of manage to be honest enough and sort of ask the right questions of each other, that a conflict actually went from being like really charged to being like, oh, to like
Mm,
kind of relaxing again. And like that's like a high bar. Like it's
yeah.
hard to reach that bar already in person. It's very hard on Twitter, maybe impossible. Um, like Twitter is really not actually that good of a medium for having conflicts. That's part of the problem, of course. Um, but where was I going with this? Like, uh, I do think there's something valuable, really valuable about being able to have any experience at all of seeing a conflict like not be disastrous. Just being like, oh,
Yeah.
that's like a thing that can happen. That can be like just a part of how
Mhm.
life goes, and it's like fine. And also just like necessary for actual intimacy or something. Like I'm, one of the things that I am thinking about in the back of my head is something like preparing for my future marriage to go well.
Mhm.
Like a lot of the emotional stuff like for me has roots in like, okay, what went wrong in my romantic relationships? How do I make it better in the future? And certainly in a marriage, you can't expect to avoid conflict in a marriage. Like obviously it's just gonna happen. So we might as well learn how to get good at it, I guess is.
I mean, some people really try. Like, I would say that, like, my experience was one of a similar like deficiency in seeing that model,
Mm,
but because a lot of conflict, specifically in like the parent relationship, was just avoided. Like there was like almost like a flatness to like it was like the limit was like this kind of like irritable sniping, like
mm,
little like, you know, snappiness or something. And it was like and then kind of papered over or something, like it just kind of like went back. So there's a lot of like emotional repression in that.
mm,
Like,
mm,
so there's like emotional repression or there's like emotional chaos. And one of the like, I think it's this has come up a lot whenever I've talked with people whose parents were divorced. Like there's
mm,
this very fundamental way that that experience is one of conflict builds, it does not get better, and then everything changes in a way that I can't control and I don't like.
mm. Yeah.
Like you're like you're actually like powerless to make
Mm,
your life be the way you want it to be,
mm,
which is like neither of these things. You know, so I think there's a way that conflict makes people feel very young and very powerless.
mm,
And like I feel that, like I really feel for that a lot, because that's like deep learning, like um at a time where that's the time to be learning the other thing
mm,
of like being in conflict, being different, having different preferences, needing to kind of like work together to try to make the connection workable and pleasant from like a grounded place, or a
mm.
pleasant enough from a grounded place. And like you love each other the whole time. Like you're different and you love each other the whole, like there, or that there is love. That all of this is love happening, right? That there's a way that like what you're trying to do. I mean, this does feel like it then goes back to like the basic like foundations of like individuation and other things, is that, and I'll say this in a binary way with it, despite it not being binary at all,
Mhm.
but like if we said like pre-individuation, the point of like conflict resolution is to like get people to be different so that being around them isn't hard at all or something, or get ourselves to be different so that
Mm,
being around other people isn't hard or something, like so that we stop feeling friction or something. We want it to all be
mm,
smoothed out,
mm,
like because I
mm.
can't like handle friction because the
Uh,
fear of like disconnection is too like hard.
mm, mm,
um and then post individuation, which is not a real thing, but you know, there is like a distinction. There is, I'm me and I'm the way I am inside, and I have some level of intimacy and honesty with myself about that. And you're you, and you are the way you are, and you have some level of honesty and intimacy about that. And
mm,
we
mm,
have differences, and we have differences in our preferences, we have differences in our boundaries, and those things change all the time because we are dynamic beings. Like my boundaries are different when I'm tired than when I'm alert. Like my preferences are different when I'm overextended emotionally than when I'm like super grounded and have been just doing a lot of like self-care or something.
mm,
And so sometimes the two beings that are trying to like stay in connection with each other, they are different in ways that kind of like create friction. And you can only notice that really from a place of like some amount of tuned in honesty, or you can only like know the details really, to be able to approach like your partner or whoever you're in connection with to like try to resolve that. by having a certain level of honesty and like self-acceptance to have that sort of self-honesty about what's going on inside. To be willing to like bring the honesty and intimacy to the table and be like, where the question is not like who's good, who's bad, who needs to be different, but like, what are we going to do? Like, right? Like, what are we going to do about this if something needs to be done besides just talking about it? You know? So, yeah, and I there was one other thing I wanted to say, because yeah, I don't think that that seems like a kind of hard thing to model over Twitter, but not necessarily. Like, I think if you have two people who are in a pretty grounded place, like people are probably doing this already, it just gets over pretty quickly. Like, you know, because it's like we're not trying to make everybody be like on the same page. You know, like the outcome is different. Like staying in connection versus like smoothing out all the edges is like a different question between people who are in what we're calling like the before and the after here. So I think there is some way that people can see that. I think we need like more, or as people like mature and individuate and like gain these experiences through their close relationships or their friendships, they will be bringing that to Twitter, right? And if they get into a fight on Twitter, they will be resolving it. Like, I'm sure there are people who do this already. They might not be the most like prevalent in like the collective psyche or whatever. And they're not the most attention getting because it's kind of like boring. It's not, you know, it's not like wrestling. It's not like it's not Jerry Springer or something, right? It's kind of like, wow, that was like pretty effective and quick. And it also wouldn't like freak everybody out so much. So we probably wouldn't notice so much.
Right.
And the other thing is like also letting conflict hang, you know, like these two people can actually be in conflict. That is an okay state for this collective like graph, especially like for a time. Like we don't have to be like so uncomfortable with like discord that like, oh, let's like go repair that right now, and it's like everybody's business. It's almost like, oh, there was like a tussle over here, and those two kind of got into it, and they're going to work it out or not, and that's kind of okay. Like either way, because what we can't do, or what I don't think a healthy community is one based on like an equality of positivity in all the like connective edges in that community. And I also don't think a healthy community is one where everybody's really invested in the positivity of each other's connections. Like that feels very codependent to me, and more like, no, you can be mad. Like you could get mad at somebody who I really love, and I can be like, yep, like, yeah. You know, and like if you start hurting them, I'll like be pretty mad about that, or I'll, you know, I'll have my discernment about it. But like, I don't know if this was probably part of my background, is like, yeah, sometimes people are just mad at each other for a while. Like,
yeah, sometimes people are just mad at each other. So, like sometimes people don't like each other's vibes.
Some people, yeah, like everybody's not for everybody, and like that's fine actually, and it's actually good. Because the other thing is like a closed system. Like there's a way that conflict is one of the things that keeps things fresh and like keeps things alive, because you're not like, because there is conflict, like we are individual beings, conflict exists, right? Like there's, to like flatten it out is actually just pretending. Like of course there's like a lot of room to like communicate differently about it and to like use different tools around it, but like there's no part of me that is like, we got to get all this conflict out of here, you know?
Yeah, thank you, I appreciate that. I've been like chewing in the back of my mind about just kind of like other examples of like conflicts within communities that I've been involved with. They kind of all turned out pretty poorly, which is like I'm just thinking of like when I this is a long story, but just to make it short, like when I got more into like emotional stuff and processing feelings kinds of things while I was still embedded in the rationality community, the Bay Area rationality community, I started getting into conflicts with other people about some of the stuff I was feeling. Like there was this whole, I wrote this whole thing where I was basically like, uh, it was called "It Feels Bad Around Here," where I just like talked about the vibes.
Mhm.
I was like, guys, the vibes are bad, and that was like that was like sort of a similar flavor of thing. Like I sent this thing out like in a Google Doc, just being like,
Mhm.
here are the ways in which I feel bad around here in the rationality community. And I shared that Google Doc with like 60 people. I was on some kind of whole trip about this. And I got like this extremely varied response. Some people like thanked me. They were like, "Thank you for writing this. You know, this was like
Mhm.
a breath of fresh air." And then some people got extremely mad at me. Like several prominent people in the community were just like, "This was an extremely destructive thing to do, and you shouldn't have done it." And I was like, "Nah." And basically, the result of that conflict was that I left
Mhm.
the rationality organization that I was working at. I mean, this took a while to play out, but like eventually I
Mhm.
left that organization, and then I also left the rationality community because I was just like, okay, I don't see a way to like, I don't know that we're going to see eye to eye on this. So like that is another example of like, man, I sure have not seen too many conflicts play out in a healthy way. But I did at least manage to get a little bit like I this happened in 2019, and like this year, like this April, I talked to one of the people that I was in conflict with 4 years ago, and she
Mhm.
apologized. So she was like,
Whoa,
actually, you had a point 4 years ago that we were not ready to listen to. And I was like, oh, so so that was
that's
amazing.
huge.
Like I never expected to hear that apology. Like I fully expected
Mhm.
to just like have to let that sit in the back of my mind forever. And like that was like a relief to be like, oh man, okay, so I wasn't crazy. Like that's great. Um, that gets into, for me at least, a whole thing around like so a thing I've talked about. I actually don't know if I've talked about this much on Twitter, but
Mhm.
a thing that I think about with respect to Teapot or whatever is like uh I think that its structure is is like we don't have a leader, and I like that, and I think that's good.
Mhm.
Like there's no one person that is like, I am the big boss, I tell everyone what to do and say and think and feel or whatever. Like there are prominent nodes, there are people who are more influential than other people, there are people who people like listen to and look up to and respect, but there isn't like a dominant one. And I personally am, at least for the time being, pretty comfortable with like I think if one person starts to get kind of too uppity and is like, "Oh, I'm the big guy, I should be in charge now," I think other people will just be like, "No, get out of here."
Right?
like, I'm sort of confident that there are enough like strong personalities with like strong discernment around that like we can sort of pull down tyrants if necessary,
Mhm.
including me. This is like including like that's significant to me. Like if I start getting too uppity, if I start burning, I'll be like, "Brr, brr, brr, I should be in charge." I hope that other people will be like, "No, QC, fuck, don't do that." That's part of what makes me feel safe here, because
Mhm.
I actually think it's funny. There was a thread recently that was something like, drop a piece of your lore,
Mhm.
and multiple people mentioned starting cults. Like that was, someone was like, I started a little cult on Tumblr that's kind of still ongoing, and someone else was like, I started a little cult. Like, there are some like very like articulate, like intelligent, charismatic people around here, and like
Mhm.
if you were looking for sort of baby cult leaders, you can kind of find them. And
Mhm.
I like that is sort of the price to pay maybe for like being into the stuff that we're into. Like if you actually take all of this like meditation, psychedelics, like all of these like sort of transformational practices seriously, and like if they actually start to work for you, like one of the things that will happen is that you can become like more relaxed and more confident and all these things. And one of the effects of that is that you become more charismatic. Like charisma is just a thing that will happen. Like if you actually do this stuff, not to everybody, and like different, like it'll look different to different people, and people will have different like different vastly different extents to which they're actually making any use of that. Like some people will just like be very chill about it, and some people will be like using their charisma very actively. So this is another thing, another consideration that sort of I had bouncing around the back of my mind, is sort of like how to manage the like proto cult leader energy around here, frankly. And conflict, I think, also plays an important role in that, because like one of the like maybe the primary thing that is like fucked up about like cult and guru type dynamics is the way that the guru kind of suppresses conflict. Like all conflict just becomes like I'm right and everyone else is wrong. That's like sort of how it works. It'll be variations of like, if a student tries to question the guru, then the guru is like, well, you're just not spiritual enough to like understand.
You're doing it wrong.
My deep wisdom. Yeah, like that kind of thing is like I've already I don't know that I've been in like a full-blown cult per se, but I've like seen enough versions of that at this point that I'm like, yep, that's like a real and very bad failure mode. I would very much like to avoid it. So for me, that's another angle on the like conflict question, is like seeing conflicts play out is one way we sort of check on the health of in the direction of like, is there any one person out here who has the power to unilaterally suppress conflict? Which I don't think there is, which is good. But that's like another thing that's on my mind, is sort of this like proto cult.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's on a lot of people's minds. People talk about it a lot in different ways. Like there's also there are a lot of people who have like, well, how would I say it? You like feel yourself through these practices or through other stuff. You like feel yourself start to come into your own like power. And when and there's like, I mean, I think this is so natural to like growth and development, actually, in a very similar way to like having messy conflict. Like one thing I wanted to say is that, I said like this before and after thing about like individuation and what conflict's like on either side. Through the process, through the like the transition, shit is like hella awkward and like really like clumsy. And there's a lot of growing pains, right? Like the first time someone tries to set a boundary with their romantic partner is usually a mess. The same way that the first time a toddler says no to their parents, it's like, oh, we have a name for that. Like, or like we talk about teenagers, right? Like they're trying to like relate to people and they're trying to be themselves. And it's like this big kind of disaster for a while of like chaos, right? And you get good at it by practice, right? You get good at it by being able to like have enough love and like nurturance to like be able to reflect and like learn things and be supported while you are kind of a mess for a while. So I wouldn't be surprised if like a greater conflict era of Teapot looks more like adolescence or the Terrible Twos than like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, right? Like, but that's how you get there. There's no other way to get there. You have to be like beginners at conflict for a while, So that's fine. That's where you're at, And I want to come back to the cult thing, because that's like the person who is saying, "Hey, I'm like not totally down with what you're doing there." That is conflict. Like they are being willing to engage in conflict. I do think one thing that like actual like narcissistic cults people also do is they will allow certain types of conflict that just happen to support the like energy structure of their sourcing power dynamic. Anyway, so I think like as people are growing, as they are like finding themselves and finding their means of like connecting with people, you start to feel like empowered. Like you start to find like your real power. to like move through the world. And when you're showing up, you find like, oh, I affect people. Like, and people realize that they affect people, I think, even before that. And there's a question there of like, are you able to connect with people in a way that like fills you up, and so you stop taking and start giving? Or are you an endless like need, right? That's the like infancy part of like narcissism, right? It's like, oh, this, there's no bottom to this like bucket. Like we could, you just need like more of like whoever's around that's like the right fit for you, that like will join you in your like structure of like how you exploit their the way they connect to you. Like it's just like taking, right? It's like, and they don't like get full and then be like, oh, actually I'm okay now, and now I want to actually like give back. That's kind of part of like the energy of it to me. And I think like I haven't thought about it in this way before, so this is like kind of a new way of talking about it. But I do think that there's something about like speaking for ourselves, right? Like it's okay if what you or I like would say when we enter into a conflict with somebody is, I just don't like what you're doing. Like there's something about that that doesn't sit well with me, and here's like what I think about it. Here's how it doesn't. Versus like I'm going on the mat with this person for the sake of all, right? Like that it's actually enough to like speak for yourself. I think there's a groundedness in that. I think that that models conflict well, because that's conflict between individuals, and that's not going on a crusade, right? That's not trying to root out like evil or something, you know, like and taking that upon oneself to do that. Like there's a way that just having your own discernment and holding it and being willing to speak to your own discernment actually models discernment for other people. And so it's not so much, I think this about you and I hope other people do because we need to like crush you somehow. But like, I feel this way about you. And then some other people might be like, oh, you can like do that? Oh, like we can not like that guy, or we can like not like that way of being. Oh, I just found that in me, but it's like different from this person's version of disliking. Okay. And now like there's more of a self. And having that discernment is the, like, to me, the protective force against cults and cult leaders, because that's what a cult asks you to give up is your sense of discernment. That's what it tries to like squash in you. Whether it's like a cult inside yourself of one, or a cult of a relationship of two with like a narcissistic abusive dynamic, or a family system, or like a community, like the village, whatever, or like a philosophical group, like whatever. It's, I just don't, I have like a distrust for people who try to fuck with other people's discernment.
Yeah.
Like, no, I like treasure my connection to my discernment because I know it keeps me safe. Like, I know it got me like walking my ass out of places I shouldn't be. And I love like connectedness to my discernment. And now, and because I love it, because I cherish the way it's kept me safe and like driven me to joy, right? Like has taken me to joy, not just kept me safe, not just aversion, not just walking away from things, but walking towards like loving connections where I can be myself. And giving me good reason to actually be in conflict with people I love, like to say no to things that were being asked of me because they would get in between me and like being myself. That actually like helps relationships. Like healthy relationships are actually way improved by that sort of thing. Because there's honesty there. Because I like love that for me, and I see how important it is. Like I think it's like my compass that keeps me like alive in like 100 different ways. I want it for other people too. I don't want them to have mine. I want them to have theirs.
Right.
Because actually, to me, that's also what you like get to know about people. Like that's what that's like to me, that there's something about like the intersection of our like yeses that's like, oh, that's what it means to like someone's vibe, is that like our yeses like play nicely together. I kind of want to be around them versus, oh, like our yeses like don't do that, or like I can't feel this person there, they're like a dynamic that I really don't enjoy, and so I kind of like move away from it, is when I can tell somebody doesn't have like a self boundary, and is instead trying to like shape themselves into what they think I want them to be.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just not a fan. Like there's a way where I'm like, well, now I'm not like playing with someone else, I'm like playing with myself more, like that now, like I can just do that and it doesn't have to feel like burdensome, or like I'm responsible somehow for like the shape this person's taking. Like I'd rather you just like be you, and then we see if we play well together, and like enjoy doing that.
You said like 5 very rich things in a row, so I'm having to like organize. No, it was good. It was good.
Apologies.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it. I'm probably only going to be able to
Yeah,
respond to a subset of that because I will just forget the rest.
totally.
Um, the thing you mentioned about I really liked that description of narcissism, and specifically the thing you mentioned about like trying to like I don't remember the word you used, but like override other people's discernment is for sure a thing that
Yeah.
I experienced. Like there was a lot of stuff in the rationality community, and like some people were doing this more than others, of course, but like there was a lot of stuff in the rationality community that was subtly about looking back, like sort of whose discernment is good, and like if you thought that like there was this sort of one-dimensional like how rational is this person kind of thing going on. It's kind of like power struggle to be like, oh, this guy's like really rational, he like thinks all his opinions through really carefully, and like you should defer to his opinions if you like don't know what's going on about AI risk, for example. Like, oh, that guy's thought a lot about AI risks, so you should like defer to his opinions. There was all of this like weird stuff about deferring to other people. And in retrospect, I'm just like, no, that was terrible. Like that was training people to like override their own discernment and substitute other people's discernment in its place. And I'm just like, that was just awful. And like in the worst case, there were people very actively doing this to each other. Like the guy who I sometimes refer to as my cult leader was like pretty explicitly doing this to me and other people. Like he would basically say things along the lines of like, okay, here are all these reasons why your discernment isn't trustworthy because you're like fucked up in these ways or whatever, and you should like listen to me instead because my discernment is trustworthy. And it's just like a very fucked up thing to say to another person. Like I'm just like, I don't. I'm looking back and just like, don't fucking do that, guys. Come on, it's not that hard. But you know, there were reasons why there was so much of that going on. So we could get into a whole thing. But yeah, that is something I have experienced, people trying to actively override my discernment, and I agree it's fucking sucks. It's like it's something I wish people would not do. There also feels like there was a thing that you said that touches on like the chaos. We tweeted about this at some point. The vast difference between like I don't like this versus like I don't like this and you shouldn't like this either, versus like I don't like this and if you don't agree with me then you're bad. Like which I think is maybe like it is one of the most insidious aspects of like culture war dynamics, is they have a lot of this like, not only do I not like this, but also you should agree with me or else you're bad. And I think like one of the things that we're trying to do, I think, is first of all avoid the culture war at just object level because it's such a mess. Like another great example of a conflict that has a bad model for conflict because it's just so thorny and pernicious and unresolved. And, but also I think we're all trying to avoid the dynamics, the culture war dynamics, and one of those dynamics is definitely this like, you know, either you're with me or you're against me, and if you're against me then you're probably a fundamentally bad person or something. So I do agree that there's something refreshingly direct about just like I don't like this and that's it, just like no further implications, just the sort of the bare fact like I personally do not like this.
Like I think there's a phrase that I started using at one point is like, oh, this isn't for me. Like this isn't for me. Like and even then, like I vary on how much I care to like consider why that's the case, because I like to like yes orient and like go find what is for me instead, rather than be like, oh wait, why isn't that for me? Shouldn't it be for me? Like it's for that person and I like that person. Like like sometimes that's the thing I want to do. Sometimes that's like a yes, is like digging in, but like digging in on the meta part. But mostly I'm like, oh, that's not for me. Luckily, the world has so much to offer. Like I don't need to squeeze out like goodness out of something that's not for me, because like look what else there is around. And I wanted to say, I think that so I have a thing that I've noticed that I feel differently about compared to a number of people. Like when the whole like post vibe camp like lemur discussion kind of happened, they're also kicked off this like, what are we gonna do about this like thing, like let's like how are we gonna prevent this from happening, which like I have like feelings about that as a stance in general. I'm like, I want to stop and like check, do we have a problem like before we go into that mode. Do we have a problem? Like because I didn't have a problem, like you know, people are just different. And I didn't feel uncomfortable or whatever, so on the like object level. But there's this like top down approach of like, we're going to teach people how to do this. Like we're going to teach people how not to like be that way around each other. Like I think there were like 4 or 5 different things cropping up of like, I'm going to do a workshop on this, I'm going to do a workshop on this. And it's like, yeah, I mean, yeah, there is such a thing as skill building, but development is not skill building. Like growth is not merely skill building. There are skills involved, and there's like capacity to use different skills, and mostly to discern which is the skill to use when, which you get through practice and through modeling, right? So my like perfect version of like, what do you do about this, which is like almost nothing. It's that if you actually just have people who like for that problem, let's say like have spaciousness and curiosity towards people in a way that isn't related to like Twitter status, but are actually just kind of like present, grounded, curious about people, like are okay with somebody being in the group who's like a little awkward for a while, because if the conversation stays alive, they're probably going to jump in at some point, and then I don't have to do anything. I will probably be curious about something they said, and they will come into the thing. And if you have enough people around who are like that, the modeling part happens, and people have experiences of that awkward thing, right? The growing pains. Oh shit, like I'm not in my room just typing anymore. I'm now standing in a group of people with synchronous communication going on, and this is like new for me, and I'm a little like awkward at it. But like if like being okay with people being where they are in like their process and not getting all fucked up about it, or thinking I need to like get in there and like fix it for them, or I need to fix it for this like group, like it just kind of happens. Like there's I imagine I haven't read the pre-conquest consciousness thing, but I'm like I hear you talk about it and I'm like getting a sense of it, right? Like one thing that I really liked from my education, and I think is really important to ground for, especially for all of us like smarty pants people who went and like learned how to do this stuff using our intellect as such a heavy lifter, is it's really important to like notice that people were able to learn how to do this without any of that. Like when we learn this from like our parents or from like our communities or something as we are growing up, it's not because we intellectually understand communication dynamics and can like draw it out on a whiteboard, right? It's that, oh, I'm here and I have my compass, like I have this thing and I can hear it and I can kind of like trust it, or I can like be curious about what it's saying, and I can like have space to connect, and I can like contract and expand, and like, you know, and I can't label any of that that's happening. And so yeah, there's like this top down, like we've got to fix the dynamic thing versus if we have people who can kind of like hold where like growth is going, there's a way where that actually enriches like the whole field of like people, the whole like constellation of people to actually be able to kind of like know that vibe. Like they get more
Mm.
familiar. It's like
Mm.
mentors, role models, right? And
Yeah,
a
yeah.
role model isn't somebody who necessarily is like, oh, I'm going to teach you. It's actually them just being
That is in
does
perspective
something.
consciousness. That isn't like,
That is right. Okay, good.
yeah. So they talk about like nobody like teaches there's not really teachers. Like nobody really teaches the kids how to do stuff. The way the kids learn how to do stuff is they just like hang
Yep.
out with the adults while the adults do stuff, and they just like pick it up. They like start, and
Mm-hmm.
they literally pick it up in the sense of like they'll start picking up the physical tools involved. Like they'll pick up the
Mm-hmm.
little, if you use like a little chisel, they'll like play with the little chisel. If you use like a bow and arrow, they'll like play with the bow and arrow. They like just start touching all of the tools and then watching
Mm-hmm.
adults use them and then start trying to use them. And that's how they just, and the adults don't have to do anything. They don't really have to do anything
Yep.
other than just doing what they're doing. The adults are just
Yep.
doing life, and the kids are just hanging out.
Mm-hmm.
That's sort of the model of education, and it's there's something very like primal and
Uh-huh.
also kind of beautiful about it. Like, oh yeah, that like makes so much sense, uh, and like is somehow like the most, maybe the most human native form of learning is just like watching like watching something be modeled. So that makes sense to me.
Well,
Yeah.
think about like I like to point out like how much of our ancestral past, like primates, mammals, etc.,
Mm.
were social beings that didn't have like language the way we do,
Mm.
right? And yet the young still had to learn how to survive in increasingly complex social dynamics and ways like, um, kittens play fight to learn like what's like this is actually a feeling about the conflict thing is, oh, like actually teapot means like to play fight a bit, like
Mm.
people need to rough and tumble a little bit with like evenly matched peers,
Mm.
because that's how you feel like, oh, actually I just went too far, I just like hurt that person, I need to dial that back. Like you
Mm.
need a field where you're discern, you get to try using your compass and be like, oh
Mm.
fuck, like I went too far, and oh actually I feel like I could have like pushed a little harder there, like because that's how you feel like your bounds and your capability and your power and other people's too, and you see how you
Mm.
affect people in
Mm.
experientially, like when a kitten gets too rough with another kitten, the one that got hurt, they like yelp a certain way, and that is the cue to the other kitten to like back off a bit, and to the point where like if you're a human and you have a kitten and they bite you, you don't like whack them on the head, you actually just make a high pitched sound and then they like stop and they like lick you to be like, oh, I was just playing, like sorry, like they have like repair built in, it's like
Mm.
really precious.
That's great.
um
Yeah. I
yeah.
like this. That's, we should definitely be like kittens play fighting. That's a great.
Yeah. And part of that's like the lick. Oh, sorry. Hey, man, I like didn't really mean. I bit you. Like, oh, sorry, man. I didn't mean to do that. We're good. We're good. Like, let's here. You now. You get me. Okay.
Yeah. One of the things that sort of fed into this whole situation for me was like watching some of the more like disagreeable people like Kersey and like Defates, and then noticing that it's something about watching them felt really good. Like something
Mm-hmm.
was invigorating. Like, oh yes.
Yeah.
Mm. Ooh.
Yep.
Like there was just something that felt very nourishing about it to me. And I was like, ah, yes, there's like something important here that I feel like I need.
Like catharsis.
Not exactly, but just like it's something about it just felt like balanced or
Mm-hmm.
healthy or like just part of like the texture of human living or something.
Mm-hmm.
Like I get sort of a similar feeling when I like, like there was a period where I was like visiting churches, and I would go to a church and I would see like a bunch of kids running around and be like, yeah, that's like so good. That's like part of the texture of an ordinary human life.
Yeah.
And like people getting into conflicts and like making fun of each other is like also part of the texture of
Mm-hmm.
an ordinary human life. And that's another, I wonder if there's kind of a gendered component of this, because like I grew up, like I was in a fraternity in college, and like when you're in a fraternity with a bunch of dudes, like you just making fun of each other is just like a normal thing that happens, and it's like a part of the bonding experience. And it's like it's fine. It's like, yeah, like
Hmm.
there's a kind of there's a deep kind of affection that men show each. I mean, I don't know if women probably have a version of this. I don't know, but like there's a deep kind of affection in my experience that men specifically show each other by just like making fun of each other a lot. There's a kind of like, I guess it's a kind of play fighting. It's both a demonstration of like I know stuff about, like I know you in a certain way. Like I know sort of like what your foibles are, and I'm willing to laugh about them with you, and I'm willing to like calibrate so that I don't go too far.
Hmm.
Like there's a lot there, and it just feels good. Like it's just
Hmm.
fun. And so I think for me, I'm willing to tolerate a lot more of that kind of like playful combativeness. And I think there are probably people, and maybe women particularly, I don't know, I don't have a clear sense of this, who
Hmm.
like don't have positive experiences of that kind of
Hmm.
like play fighting, and who are just like, oh,
Yeah.
when people start insulting each other and make fun of each other, that's like bad. That's like a bad, dangerous conflict. Um,
Hmm.
so there's also a whole thing there that I'm sure people have different experiences with, or like this reminds me of being bullied or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Uh, yeah, this is a really fun thing to think about. Because I feel like I have like high tolerance for people's like anger or disagreement with me that was like not pleasantly earned, let's say. But it's there, right? It's like, oh, that's there now, I guess. Like it doesn't really bother me that much, like in a way. But like not to the point of not being self-protective if I'm like in danger, right? Like that's a different thing. But I have a sense, I've had a sense that the female like form of that, because um I grew up in a very like teasy, jokey kind of house that also had like meanness and anger and fighting, right? Like, so that's where like that capacity like grew, or like processing it like later, I mean, not like at the time, like it was a big mess. But uh but I think that there's like, yeah, so I don't really feel like my female friends and I like would ever jab at each other. But I think that the female forms of this, they can even start younger, and they are like social conflict, right? Like there is a way to me that felt like almost like for girls, because they are um like on in aggregate, like girls are doing more like of the connecting relating stuff earlier, like um theoretically at least, um that you can have like peers that are like kind of your friends but also kind of not, like you're like, you've got your like growing pains, right? And girls will have conflict with each other, that could look like bullying, because again, like awkwardness means like damage is done sometimes. um there's like conflict and like falling out and like drama, right? And gossip and all these things where it's like a more indirect, and like the aggression part is more like repressed somehow. um which I think would have a lot to do with how we like interpret and attune to and like help regulate or respond to like female aggression in general. Like in I think the way that people respond to like an angry girl, which is often that they don't recognize her as angry at all. They think she's like sad or she's scared. So now she has to like, she learns when I'm angry, actually I'm like a wilting flower and not like actually a raging lion right now. um or like a mama bear, for example, right? That instead all the aggression has to like leak out the sides, like in like this like social dynamic navigation thing. And actually, so to me, I'm like, well, if you want to see girls like have less need to like have it leak out the sides, you just have to kind of let anger be what it is and give them the same like healthy outlets to express it and to feel their force against somebody who doesn't like topple over from it, but also lets it affect them and lets the girls like see how it affects them. And like there's like a lot of health. And the word I was going to use for what it feels like to see people in conflict is like there's an aliveness to it. Like there's an honesty to conflict. Like it, like the gloves come off or whatever. Like the repression comes off, and it's like, oh, you're like saying something true. Like that's true to you, even if there are consequences, like you're not modulating quite as much or something. So there's something more like core to that. And it's letting anger get expressed, or like because to me anger is like really heavily the energy of that like no boundary, like no, not for me, not okay, needs to be different, like no. And and anger is so repressed. Anger is like so repressed. So actually, in a couple different like one-on-one kind of conversations working with women, one of the things that I find that like part of my capacity allows is to let anger start to come through. And often what it actually kind of often has this flavor of either like clearly this person is angry about something, like I can feel anger in my system because I like recognize it, but there's like a big like stopper on it, and instead the expression is so polished, like the expression is so buttoned up and so fair, and it's so it's so nice, like it's so tidy, and it's like, and they'll be like, oh yeah, like that really sucked, and I'm like, how much did it suck? Like, can I see how much it sucked actually? And then you get into a mode where what it looks like probably for like the next 5 minutes is you're talking shit. Like you're using fighting words. Like you're like letting the unfair part. You're not gonna like make sure everybody knows, oh, but it's actually okay. Sure, like maybe we'll find out, right?
Maybe.
Or maybe like, we'll find out. And there's this way where like I can't think of very much that I've seen. I haven't done this too much with men, maybe like a couple times, but like with women, especially the energetic like shift that occurs when you like can unstopper that thing, even for like a minute, it's huge. Like people like melt into themselves in this way. And it's like, oh, now we're like here. Like now we're both here. Like there is like honesty. And like, I think, the repression of anger like makes a lot of sense. I have like a lot of compassion for why we do that. Most of or a lot of us, our experiences of other people's anger is of like violence and abuse, and or of like somebody might have like play fought with us at school, and in a way that's like pretty typical for like that kind of age growing pains thing, and we didn't have the safe like loving thing to fall back into to help nurture us and help us feel better when we've been hurt, right? And protect us, right? There's Kitty, by the way.
That's great. Everyone likes that when that happens. That is oh, big Kitty.
Yeah,
that's great.
Good. And so our experiences of anger are ones of being horribly hurt, not feeling repair, not ever feeling okay after, being scared to go back into that context, not feeling like we know how to defend ourselves or to speak up for ourselves. Like we need help with that shit, right? Like we need help in context where we learn it, where we practice it. And you have to build up, right? It's like building a muscle to be able to express your boundaries and your anger and like be self-protective in a way that isn't like hurting other people. And so instead we recoil from being angry because we don't want to do that to people. Like we know what it's like to be on the receiving end of that anger, and we don't want to be that. Like we don't want to have that in common with people who hurt us, right? And so it's like the conflict thing. We don't have healthy models of anger, of like what that looks like. And we also like, I also think this is a big thing in Teapot, is that like words can be like really damaging. But you can also make safe places for them, for whatever they are. Like you can have a person, like you need people that you can actually just say exactly the shitty thing you feel without like feeling responsible for like this cascade of consequence of having said it.
Yeah.
Because like you're wanting to be responsible, you're not wanting to like cause this like big ripple effect, but that means that like you don't ever get to feel it.
Mhm.
Versus, and that's when it like leaks out the side too,
Mhm.
because it's not going to go nowhere, and it ends up like circling back and really hurting people's like volition and their will and like motivation and their like ability to move. Like you could have the compass, but your relationship to that compass builds from like willingness to enact what it tells you, which includes, this is a no for me, and I need to somehow stay put and enact my no, which means I'm going to actually have to set a boundary here. I'm going to have to like let the anger like do a thing, which isn't like I need to hurt that person, but I need to just say no. Like,
Mhm. Mhm.
even if it's like, no, thank you, you know, or I need to be able to hear my anger and let it move me away from this thing. Right. So if you have a compass, but you don't have like, I actually think it hurts your ability to develop the compass if you can't let anger be part of the no
Mhm.
that you
Mhm.
receive.
Mhm. Yeah. Thank you. That was very rich. There's like a lot. We could easily go on for a while longer just about
We
anger,
could, but we can't.
but we also cannot. Yeah. There's just I'm just really appreciating the like the rich texture of this kind of picture that you're laying out. Like I have also like talked to people about anger and sort of seen places where they were suppressing anger, and like definitely agree that there's something kind of special about anger. I don't know, people are suppressing all kinds of
Mm-hmm.
things all the time, but I do think there is something special about anger, and I do think it has to do with the ways in which our experiences of anger in the past
Mm-hmm.
probably, involve violence and abuse and those kinds of things. Like I have definitely had a relationship to anger shaped by, my relationship to my dad, like
Mm-hmm.
uh that sort of thing. It's there's also some kind of like uh, the ways in which men suppress anger and the ways in which women suppress anger feel distinct.
Mm-hmm.
There's like at least one gendered component, and I don't know that I have very good words for it, but it's like uh for women it seems to be some variation of like, oh, good girls shouldn't make trouble, like good girls should be nice
Mm-hmm.
all the time. And like I don't have a clear, like, my vague sense is that stuff can go back like really far, like that can be like very very early conditioning. Like I don't have a clear sense of it from the inside, but
Mm-hmm.
girls seem fucked up about it sometimes, like,
Yep.
so probably it goes back really far. And then I think for me, uh as a man, anger feels tied up with uh like I keep wanting to call it feminism. Other people keep not wanting to call it feminism, but I don't know. But it's tied up with this question of like, what does a good man do? Like, is a good man someone who gets angry, or is a good man someone who like, is like kind and warm uh and especially like does a good man like get angry at women specifically? I feel like is a big like I am much more comfortable getting angry at men. It's like fine, it's like, yeah, whatever, you're a piece of shit, fuck you. But getting angry at women has been extremely difficult for me. I've been like, wait, but I thought they were perfect angels or whatever. Like,
Oh
so that's been
no.
like, that's for me has been especially stuck, and I suspect that's some version of that is pretty common. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
at least among sort
Mm.
of like more awkward dudes or whatever, like more nerdier. Like I, if it like that feels kind of tied up with things like, oh, I like can't hit on this girl because what if she thinks I'm creepy? Like all those kinds of things, like
Yeah.
a lot of all kinds of stuff there.
Mm-hmm. I think that you're very right about the like good girl thing. I think that's huge. Not just with anger, but like with a lot of
A
things.
lot of things. Yeah.
Um, about like just this like real, and actually I will say this really um plays into my experience of disagreeing with people on Twitter,
Mm,
actually.
mm,
There's a sense that I get that people have like an in the air, in the water, deeply subconscious expectation that women who are not mad or at you, or people or women who are not like, that a woman who disagrees with you is also going to take care of your feelings while she does it.
mm.
And And if she doesn't do that, then you're in real trouble. If she doesn't do that, she's like really mad at you. You're like, you're totally screwed. And the thing and the thing is that like, so I find this is that sometimes I will just straight up just disagree with a person. I will just state my disagreement and then not do the like, but we're good. Like, but I understand like your intent. And I'll just like, I also am not like calling them bad. I don't like name call, and I'm not actually trying to bucket things in this good and bad way. I'm just being like, I'm being pretty like precise in my disagreement, or like limited in my disagreement. And then I'm just like not doing the other part. I'm just like leaving that out. And people think I'm so mad at them all the time. And it's like, actually, I feel like, yeah, I disagree with you, but I feel pretty neutral about it. Like, it's more just like, I just noticed difference and like, oh, like we could talk about this, you know? But like, I had a funny experience of this where somebody at Vibe Camp that I saw in person, I had a sense this was probably the case about like an interaction we had where it was like, oh, they like really felt like we had beef. And like, I didn't feel like we had beef. I felt like I just disagreed with them about this one thing. But like, to just see a woman say a disagreement and not seem that concerned or involved in like how her disagreement's gonna like land, and not like taking responsibility for that, seems to like really set off some people's interpretation of like anger. And I haven't really necessarily felt, I don't want to like overstate the like genderedness of that. I don't know that only men do that. Like women might feel that way too. If a woman is like disagreeing without like, I always call it like covering it in cotton candy or something, you know, like trying to make it okay that she disagreed. Like, no, it's okay. Like I do disagree. It better be okay, because I do. Trying to feel into this other thing. So, I mean, I think so when you say this thing about like feminism, I guess here's like a question I have. Do you feel like a woman could handle you being mad at her?
That's a good question. It brings up a very specific memory for me of a time where a woman did not handle me being angry at her. So yeah, it does not seem to, it brought up a second memory of another time when a woman did not handle me being angry at her. Oh, the second memory is really bad. I left her like crying on the floor. That was like a whole. Anyway, it's been bad. I have not seen it go very well.
I think that's the thing that the like gender difference seems to have in common, is the idea that other people can't handle me being angry, so I have to just not do it. Or maybe like to your point, men can handle me being angry, but women can't.
Yeah, like if I go like, hey, fuck you, they'll be like, hey, fuck you. I'm like, yeah, all right, now we're
yeah. No, and I think I do have a feeling like well, I mean, no, this actually gets, I'm like more comfortable being angry like with men, or like more directly like sparring or something. This might have just literally been that like working in tech for a while, that's what is happening. Yeah, you're just like, that's what's happening. Like you're in conflict, and sometimes like that gets snappy, and you can just have to like, you know, you're building the muscle, right? You're like regulating yourself at the same time as you're doing that. I think that people need a lot of ways to like, there's like this spectrum that might start at like irritation and go to like rage, right? And there are certain people who can handle irritation, right? They can handle letting irritation come through your like voice or your like stance or something, as opposed to like, oh, I'm irritated and I need to like slurp that back in because they can't handle it. Or I'm frustrated, or I'm actually like pissed off, or I'm, you know, I'm angry, or I'm like mad or whatever. Like you can like grow that with people and like start letting like a little bit more of the like authenticity of that expression through. it really helps. Like, it really makes a huge difference if you're mad at them versus if you're mad in general. Like, I think we can build our capacity for anger by having people that we're able to be angry around without them being the person we are angry at. Because all of the like abuse violence dynamics are, to me, really deeply involved with being the target of someone's anger, right? That like their anger is not just going to be here in the room with you, but it's going to like want to act upon you somehow. And I think that would like bring up a lot of people's defensiveness. So rather than being like, oh, they like, a lot of people can't handle people being mad at them while they are in the full force of that emotion, right? Because that can be pretty scary.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that that person doesn't need a place where they can go feel the full force of that emotion, right? It's just you're not resolving conflict when that's happening. Like, you're not having a conversation when somebody's at like an 8 out of 10 angry in a way that was brought on by another person. There's nothing like, there's no like connecting thing kind of to be done if it's over the top, or if there's not like requisite safety that like built up over time of feeling like, oh, I can actually be pretty mad at this person around them, and we have enough of a basis of safety and love that we know that that is actually going to help it move, and then and we're going to repair. And I'm not hurting them, I'm like acting out and like throwing a fit kind of. But you probably need to go throw a fit somewhere, and you need people who don't get like scared of it. So I really think anybody, and I think this is a weird gift that people who grew up and then like grew up in like high conflict like households, or around like people who are mean, and then like have done their work to kind of like find their inner senses of safety and okayness, like those people can be like containers for other people's anger. It's like there's certain friends of mine where like their version of being angry at me is so timid. And like I don't know quite how to tell them like, I'm not scared of you. I'm not scared of how mad you could get at me. Like I'd rather you just be mad than like this other thing of like, oh, I'm actually like now trying to like navigate you and like try to make this different in a like leaking out the sides way. I'm like, it sounds like you're mad at me. Do you want to just be mad at me? No, because I'm not. Yeah,
I wouldn't consider myself particularly good at this, but I do think I've managed to be reasonably okay at like being with other people's anger that's not directed at me. Like often I try to egg people on, like I mean, mostly people who I can tell like could use it. Just like, hey, yeah, get more angry, like keep going, like be there was a conversation I had with someone once where I said some version of like it's okay to be like, you can be like unfair and uncharitable for this conversation, like it's fine, just like there's something that you need to express, and it will just be so much easier if you're not also trying to be very fair at the same time. There's just like you learn, or like I have learned from myself and also from watching other people, that there's a straightforward way of expressing anger that's like not, it's just like that fucking asshole, I can't fucking believe, like just like normal, just like being a normal human who's angry in a normal way, and like that can actually move it, and that can actually move it like more effectively than most other things, than like trying to like carefully control
100%.
Yeah, and it will involve like probably saying some really unfair stuff at some point, and like that's fine, and you can just like while you're in the emotion, I mean this is true for every emotion, but since we're talking about anger, like while you're in the moving the emotion, like you have like this very specific perspective or whatever, and just be really unfair and uncharitable. And then in my experience, once the emotion is moved a little, like the perspective comes later, then you're like, okay, now that I've like moved it, now I'm going to like step back, like take a broader perspective, but I don't have to rush that process.
It's there's a way that I think for every emotion, there's the feeling itself, and also feeling responsible for the consequences of how you express that feeling. And there's a way that certain, I mean, I could talk about like just this alone for like an hour, but how we learn which of these two things, at least two things, is where your attention belongs for how long, right? Like your actual experience versus the effect of you on other people, and which is actually just your attention on you or your attention on other, or like the world, right? So it's like we learn where our attention is supposed to be between these things, where it's effective, where it matters, where it's safe to put that attention, and where it works to like put that attention, right? And so you can notice both, right? You can notice, oh, I have a feeling, and I also have part of me that's like considering the impact of me on others. And you can notice if you default to only giving attention, that only one of those ever gets your actual time and attention. Because I think a well-regulated, well-individuated, and well-connected, grounded person actually has an awareness of both of these things and gives them both time and attention. But if we never learn that anything good happens, anything transformative happens when you actually let yourself just have your experience without having to do that same thing, that other thing at the same time, you don't get to have the experience that something actually changes when you do that. Like that after you've like screamed in a pillow, or like had a little like fake grapple with a friend, or like yelled about something, or like talked shit a certain way, like that it actually changes what goes on in you. If you've never had that experience, you don't trust that you'll ever come out of it. Like you think that if you go down that route, you're going to be like an angry, violent, mean person forever. And I think the opposite is actually true. The more anger stays put, the more meanness starts leaking out the sides, the more passive aggression there is, the more manipulation there is, because you never just get to be like honest with yourself about like what you're actually feeling. And then to me, the feeling coming out of like anger, if I've really like let it happen, is this like very expansive, very calm, but energized sense of like clarity, right? Like, you know, like sorry, this cat's like demanding to be fed. she has what she wants, she expresses it. She's a model.
Beautiful.
Yeah. That's my experience of it. Like it's like the purifying fire of like anger and rage. It's like it, and I think what you said, like I think people's experiences of being stuck with anger because it's like repressed and then it comes out in these passive aggressive ways, right? And so people's expectation is whatever they do with anger, it's gonna like last forever. But my experience sounds like your experience in that anger like moves very quickly when it's allowed to move. Like it's an action oriented thing. It's not actually like meant. I don't think of it as like a slow burn, like roiling thing. It's like a whoosh. It like wants to respond to this moment. It doesn't want to respond in the abstract to like 10 years. I mean, I think some like rage and stuff might, you know, like long-term injustice type stuff. But like anger is like about what to do right now. You know, and so you like it actually like transmutes, I think, faster than a lot of other feelings when it's like allowed to do that.
I think that's been my experience. And I like your use of the word clarity specifically. That's like that's also been my experience. Not super consistently, but when I can get really into it, there's a like, I don't know if you, there's a way that there's a way that the quality of a person's voice can change. There's like a specific kind of like ringing quality that a person's voice can have when they get angry, but in like a clear way. They're just like very clearly describing what they're angry about and like what they're standing up for. And it like feel like people, you know, maybe are used to hearing angry voices and feeling scared and being like, oh, angry voices, that's something's like not okay. But this particular kind of angry voice, like in my experience, it feels very good to hear. You're like, oh, it's like, it's just so, there's something so like powerful and like straightforward about it. It's just like, wow, this is like, amazing. It's
Yeah.
like, yeah, like I'm gonna
Yeah.
cheer this person on,
Yeah.
this person who's being
Yeah.
angry, but in a very clear way. Just like, yeah, yeah, you're a hero.
Yeah.
He's amazing. Oh, whoops.
Yeah.
Hang on. Whoopsie.
A
I don't know if you heard that. I just started playing some music.
video.
Yeah.
Oh,
Hopefully it is fine. So you said you had to go soon, is that right?
I do need to go.
Yeah.
I have things I have to get to today, but
So
um, I very much enjoy like the sprawl
mhm.
we got to here. I feel like we could probably keep going for like a whole other
For
hour
a
and
while,
like
yeah.
still find like other stuff because it's
Mhm.
we have like a lot of overlap and difference in a way that is really interesting to me.
Yeah. Yeah, there's all
Um,
sorts of stuff here. Mhm.
yeah. Um, yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like once I'm cuddling a cat, I don't think there's anything else that needs to be said.
That's
I'm like,
fair.
yeah.
This is a good ending
Yeah.
for a
It
video.
feels nice and complete to me in a way. I think it's really helpful to hear people talk about like forbidden feelings.
Mhm.
I think you might have introduced the phrase forbidden feelings to me. Is that a
I
thing
don't,
you ever
I
said?
don't, I don't think so,
Okay.
but like I'm into that. I'm like, yeah, the
Yeah.
feelings, they're all good, all of them, every single one of them. We need all
Yeah.
of that. That's
Yeah. And that's and not to like tie too cute of a bow on it, but to me that's like the whole thing about like discernment, individuation, whatever. It's about being able to be with what is, including whatever would be like shadow or would be rough or would be difficult, like, and not all at once because you have to like grow that. Like people are beginners at like expressing anger, right?
Mhm.
And that's fine. But that there's no part of like being alive that isn't like alive. It's right.
Mhm.
It's like that needs to be killed like for aliveness to continue. It's just part of it.
Mhm.
And it's and things that like affect us as much as our emotions do, like we have them for reasons because evolution is like a cheapskate in a certain way. Like things that really affect our behavior are like expensive. So to me it's like getting familiar with the range of emotions, like both like the breadth and the different qualities of them and what like movements they want to make happen, um
Mhm.
to like learn what they're for,
Mhm.
because nothing's like wasted, I think, in the like human experience, even if it doesn't feel good.
Mhm. Yeah. So I appreciate that as like the concluding paragraph of, of this whole thing. All right, thank you very much, Jessica, for coming
Thank
on.
you.
Hope you have a nice rest of your day with whatever needs to get taken care of and stuff.
Thanks, you too.
All right.